We are in Boardinghouse Park, a lovely green space in Lowell National Historical Park. The backdrop here is the boot cotton mills, which were constructed in 1835. Immediately, the boot cotton mills hired hundreds of young women, primarily born in New England. They worked in the mills and they resided in the boarding houses. There were 8 blocks of these boarding houses that extended across the park. And they were teeming with, again, young women, primarily single women. One of the best known of the mill girls who worked at age 11 was Lucy Larcom. Her mother was a boarding house keeper at the boot mills. And Lucy Larcom, like so many of the women, lived in the boarding house in very close proximity to the agent's house, which was just up the road here, just across the street. And so this idea of the agents living close to the mill and the boarding house the workers in the boarding houses was something that really lasted for a couple of generations.
For the Irish females who worked here in the mills, the boarding houses were not their primary residence. Yes, some of them did live here, but most of them lived in the Acre neighborhood, which is beyond here. Interestingly, again, the number of females who worked in the mills, Walter Hickey, a local historian, did a study using city directories and census records, and he found that the females, Irish females, who worked here at the Boot and the Merrimack were less in number than those who worked in the Hamilton and the Lawrence. Why was the agent in the Hamilton and the Lawrence hiring Irish females, and yet here at the Boot and Merrimack they weren't? We're not sure. There are no records for that, but it would be interesting to find out.
The boarding house system that Lowell was so well known for really had the corporations owning the boarding houses, but in fact you had primarily females of middle age as the boarding house keepers, and they were essentially like small business people. The ability of them to run a well-kept boarding house serving good food was really important for obviously keeping the workers happy and willing to live on the corporation, so-called. The boarding house system lasted until really into the late 19th century. The first mills that sold them off, the Appleton mills, began to shed the boarding houses in the 1880s. The boot mills continued to operate boarding houses into the early 20th century, wound up selling off these properties in around 1910. So the boarding house system lasted for quite a long time, and over the years the population in the boarding houses became a little bit more diverse. In other words, there weren't just young female Yankee workers living and working in the boot mills. Here we are inside the reconstructed boarding house that Lowell National Historical Park had reconstructed in the 1980s. It's a fairly reasonably good facsimile of what the boarding house looked like during its time of operation, again going back to the 1830s. The dining room was really kind of the center of activity for the boarding houses. This is where the women had their meals, both the breakfast, so-called supper, which was the mid-afternoon meal, and dinner. And upstairs, as we go upstairs, you'll see this is again a reconstructed bedroom where the mill girls slept. Interestingly enough, the hearings that were held where mill girls testified for the shortened workday, the 10-hour day in 1845, one of the major complaints was, in fact, not just the conditions in the mills, but the terrible ventilation and poor air in the boarding houses. So even though the boarding houses were again kind of a center of social activity where young women made friends, in some cases lifetime friendships, the boarding houses were not the most wonderful places to live as you perhaps would have the impression today. I'm standing in front of the agent's house. The agent was the most powerful mill executive in Lowell. They were typically paid $100,000 a year in salary, and you compare that to the average textile worker who was making maybe $2 to $3 per week. This agent's house was built in the 1840s. It was actually a double house for the families of the agents of the boot mills and the Massachusetts mills. What's interesting about this particular locale with the agent's house, and this was typical of other agents' houses in Lowell, is that they were located very close to the mill, virtually right next to the workers who lived in the boarding houses. This would change over time. In fact, by 1900, there was a very different geographic proximity with the agents, the workers, and the mills.